This is a lecture on CT chest indications that I'm giving as a Dr. D.K. Tank Memorial Oration a little later in the day today. And I will be speaking about these 5 subjects and a little bit about each. So let's start with diffuse lung diseases, which basically can be differentiated into 2 major categories: the bronchiectasis, COPD, air trapping, and the interstitial lung disease category. Bronchiectasis is easy to diagnose. We see these dilated bronchi, which are larger than the accompanying vessels, irreversibly. And we can also often make out the cause, as in this patient who has dextrocardia, bronchiectasis in the right middle lobe and lingula. Anyone, this would be primary ciliary dyskinesia or cartogenous. Cartogenous is a subtype of PCD. Another form is this one where we see high attenuation mucus plugs within these dilated bronchi, and this is very specific for allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis or ABPA. Then we come to interstitial lung diseases, which we have to differentiate primarily into fibrosing and non-fibrosing types. Fibrosing ILDs are characterized by reticular opacities, honeycombing, and traction bronchiectasis. And once we see a fibrosing ILD, our job is to differentiate between the UIP and non-UIP patterns. A UIP pattern is when we see reticular opacities, honeycombing, traction bronchiectasis, subpleural basal predominance, and nothing else. And a UIP pattern without etiology is idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. If we see an etiology, like this is a 27-year-old with a UIP pattern, and this patient has esophageal dilatation, this is scleroderma ILD with a UIP pattern, whereas this patient who worked in a brake lining factory has pleural calcification and a UIP pattern, and this is asbestos ILD with a UIP pattern. Then we have the non-UIP patterns, where we have a whole bunch of acronyms here, such as bronchiolocentric interstitial pneumonia, non-specific interstitial pneumonia, PPFE, LIP, DAD, all of which may be due to these conditions, but basically are non-IPF entities. As in this patient who has honeycombing but has an axial distribution of disease from hilum to periphery with traction bronchiectasis but with ground glass, ill-defined centrilobular nodules, and in many parts of our city and country this is characteristic of fibrotic hypersensitivity pneumonitis. The pattern is non-UIP, bronchiolocentric interstitial pneumonia, or a BIP pattern, and that is the entity, the etiology that causes it. Non-fibrosing ILDs are characterized by ground glass, consolidation, septal thickening, ill-defined and discrete nodules. And the commonest non-fibrotic ILD in our country is hypersensitivity pneumonitis, where we see these ill-defined non-branching centrilobular nodules. The other common entity is this one, where we see perivascular, fissural, and subpleural nodules, and this is sarcoidosis. We've also started seeing organizing pneumonia patterns. They were most commonly seen during COVID-19 with so many different appearances: subpleural, peribronchovascular, the reverse ground glass sign, and the reverse bat's wing sign. And then we have to further investigate for the etiology. One hot topic is interstitial lung abnormality, which is the presence of an incidental finding of interstitial lesions in asymptomatic individuals. There are these 3 categories here, and it's important not only to diagnose them, but once they have been mentioned in the report, to follow them up, because at least 50% of patients with ILAs tend to progress over the next 5 years, and hence every 1 or 2 years following them up clinically or with CT scans becomes important. The next category is of focal lung lesions, of which the solitary lung nodule is an important part. Now, anything less than 6 millimeters is usually not significant, and 6 to 8 millimeters can also be observed. So, we're only going to look at nodules greater than 8 millimeters. And I have this case I've been using for the last 25 years, but it's also from that nostalgia perspective, but it still works. So this 52 years old came for a routine health checkup. We see this nodule in the right mid zone. The first thing we have to do is confirm the intrapulmonary location. And it is important because this patient once came to me for a biopsy, left upper lobe mass. Turns out this was a cutaneous neuroma. And this is a patient who was sent for evaluation of this nodule in the right lower zone, which just turned out to be a sclerotic bone island focus. So we have to be sure. And the CT scan in this case shows us a lobulated enhancing nodule in the right upper lobe. So the question we have to ask is this benign? Is this malignant? Is this indeterminate? Is this not important? Now we have three criteria for benignity: complete calcification, absence of enhancement on CT or uptake on PET, and no growth in 2 years. So here's a patient with a nodule in the left mid zone, unchanged over 2 years, completely calcified. We can leave this alone. Or this patient with the subpleural nodule, complete absence of enhancement, you can leave it alone. Our patient has an enhancing nodule and the lesion has grown. So there was a radiograph done 2.5 months ago, which we then traced out, and we found that the rate of growth was very worrisome in this patient. So there are no criteria for benignity, which makes it indeterminate, and the idea of indeterminate is malignant unless proven otherwise. So what would you do next? These are the options. This patient underwent a CT-guided biopsy, turned out to be adenocarcinoma. So if you look at the flow chart for solitary nodules, the aim is not to miss malignancy or active non-malignant lesions that need treatment, while not over-treating benign lesions or old granulomas. So when we see a nodule on X-ray or CT, we first confirm that there are no benign criteria. If it remains indeterminate, make sure that it has grown if it's indeterminate. No uptake on PET, benign. If there is uptake, then it's indeterminate and we biopsy it. And then growing nodules can either be biopsied, resected, or go under active surveillance. Less than 6 mm, leave alone. And then if you are a smoker, follow lung rads. So let's look at lung cancer screening, which we have been doing now for the last 11 years. This is one of our first cases, a 62-year-old man, 25 pack years history of smoking. We found an 8.8 millimeter nodule. There is a lung rats chart that we follow. So this patient required a 3 months follow-up, which we did. The nodule increased in size. I biopsied it and it turned out to be adenocarcinoma. While these are the standard criteria for patients who should be screened, even if a person is a 10 pack years history smoker in our country, it is worth the effort, because apart from nodules, we also pick up COPD and other complications of smoking. But remember that lung cancer screening, which is something you can ask for whenever a person comes to you or whenever a smoker comes to you, picks up cancer early. Non-resolving opacities also need to be worked up, and this is an opacity that is not resolved with standard care, usually over 3 weeks. And I'll show you what happens when people fall through the gaps. This 78-year-old presented with fever and a lung lesion in April 2018. We saw this consolidation in the right lower lobe. She was treated for a pneumonia, had multiple radiographs, but apparently remained the same. She was asymptomatic, didn't follow up, came back in 21, and you can see how the lesion has increased in size, and there are new nodules now which were not present earlier. A PET was done which showed uptake, and what do you think this would be? If you choose from here, and this I biopsied it, turned out to be invasive mucinous adenocarcinoma. So all non-resolving opacities must be worked up fully, either to complete resolution or worked up for the exact cause. Now this patient had a non-resolving opacity for almost 6 months, and then when we traced it proximally, turned out there was a bronchial obstruction which eventually was a clove that the patient had inhaled. Or this 29-year-old with a non-resolving opacity, when we looked at the angio, there was an abnormal vessel and this was sequestration. So it may be a malignant lesion or sometimes just a simple proximal obstructing foreign body or sequestration. The third category are the vascular pathologies. All of us are now aware of acute pulmonary embolism being diagnosed by CT pulmonary angiography, where we inject contrast to make sure that the pulmonary arteries are opacified, and then all these filling defects that we see represent thromboembolism, and sometimes we may also see infarcts and other complications. Here is the filling defect in the lower lobe artery. Now, some of these vascular patients may present in a chronic manner, and we have an entity called chronic thromboembolic pulmonary disease and hypertension, where we may see a mosaic pattern on the HRCT, perfusion defects on the dual energy, filling defects on the CTPA, bronchial artery collaterals, and other parameters. Then we have mediastinal lesions, where CT plays a very important role, and this is the general flowchart of how to approach these, where the main aim is to figure out whether it's a mass or lymphadenopathy and whether it needs a biopsy. We categorize the mediastinum using the ITMIG classification. The purple is the prevascular space, the blue is the visceral space, and the yellow is the posterior paravertebral space. Now, this 15-year-old presented with fever, and here's a mass with multiple areas of necrosis in the prevascular space, which here I've depicted in blue. And if you look at prevascular space masses, they are typically one of the 5 T's: teratodermoid, terrible lymphoma, thyroid, thymic lesion, tuberculosis. What do you think our patient had? Now, because of the necrosis, it was called TB, put on anti-TB treatment, no response, and the patient came back about 3 months later, and we find that the lesion has become more necrotic and increased in size. What would you do next? PET, biopsy, both. The patients wanted a biopsy directly, didn't want a PET. Did it, turned out to be lymphoma, couldn't subtype. Then we did a PET, found that this was necrotic, so we had to biopsy only the periphery, which I did again, and it turned out to be marginal zone lymphoma. So mediastinal lesions have to be worked up and almost always biopsied, unless they're obvious vessel lesions or hiatus hernia, lipomas, etc. Then we have pleural and chest wall lesions, and for pleural lesions, CT is useful in all of these conditions. I'll just touch on pneumothorax because we don't talk about that too often. CT not only detects pneumothorax but often the cause. So in this patient who has severe pneumothorax, we see these large cystic areas, one of which has ruptured and caused it. Here's another patient with severe emphysema and another pneumothorax here because of rupture of one of the bullae. But sometimes you have to look for them. So this 18-year-old had a spontaneous pneumothorax, mild residual air here, and you can see this tiny bulla in the apex, which we had to search for so that then this could be treated. Pleural tumors can be focal or multifocal diffuse. One of the commonest pleural tumors focally is a solitary fibrous tumor, which we can see here in the major fissure. And when the pathology is diffuse, it's often difficult to differentiate among mesothelioma, metastases, and tuberculosis, and often then we would require to do a biopsy. So how do we scan for these conditions? What do we ask for? In the lungs, if it's a lung pathology, it's almost always a plain scan, unless there is a focal lesion like a nodule or a non-resolving pneumonia, in which case we may give contrast. I'll come to the specific protocol for diffuse lung diseases. For vascular pathologies, we need a CT pulmonary angio, and mediastinal and pleural lesions would be plain and contrast studies. Now, for diffuse lung diseases, this is the protocol. And when you send patients for ILDs or COPD or small airways disease, please ensure that this is done. Volume supine 1 millimeter inspiratory, then supine expiratory, prone inspiratory. This is a must in every patient. A little something new. This is a 63-year-old CKD on dialysis, had bilateral chylothoracis 3 months ago. Patient had a permacath that was introduced last year, and we can see this stenosis of the SVC and multiple collaterals here. And they wanted a lymphangiogram. Now, there are various methods of doing a lymphangiogram, and these are all very complicated. But in the last 5 years, this technique has been introduced, CT lymphangiography with intranodal injection, where you typically cannulate an inguinal node and then inject regular non-ionic iodinated contrast. I found these retroperitoneal lymph nodes, so I injected one of them with the contrast. The contrast went into the lymphatic duct, and we were able to show this entire lymphatic duct with disruption at the D5-6 level, likely because of back pressure from the SVC obstruction, and a few more reconstructions to show that. And this is great because now we can actually look at some of these entities in a much easier manner. Lastly, you can't end without tuberculosis, which can involve every part of the chest. And there are multiple patients here. This patient has miliary tuberculosis. You can see these classic 2 to 3 millimeter size nodules. This is a patient with miliary and a nodule, miliary with tree in bud or infectious bronchiolitis. These people have miliary complicating their problems. This is miliary with necrotic adenopathy. We have these patients with post-tuberculous lung disease who get secondarily infected with fungal balls. We call it chronic cavitary pulmonary aspergillosis. And TB can also involve the tracheobronchial tree. And we see here this patient who has involvement of the trachea, the right main bronchus, post-obstructive changes, and we can do these reconstructions to show the involvement of the bronchial tree. So the aim today was to look at what CT chest can do, some that is standard, some new stuff, and ending with the fact that TB remains one of our major problems at all points in time. Thank you so much for listening to me, and have a great conference today.